You're going to turn control over to me then, once we get going here.
Yeah. So cool. So we are now recording. So let us begin. So hello everyone, and thank you for joining for this webinar, which will discuss a bit of the vulnerability management challenges. My name is Cohen. I'm the VP Sales and co-founder for Vicaris, and I'm happy to host here Todd Schell from Ivanti, which will be showing a bit of the need for vulnerability management and the challenges around that. So hand to you, Todd.
Okay, Roy, thanks a lot, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I have a handful of slides here I'd like to walk through. First of all, just to talk a little bit about vulnerability management and really kind of tee up the need for, continuous update of your systems through patching. So what I would like to do is to start with the threat landscape, talking a little bit about the threats that we're seeing out there. This particular set of slides comes with information from the Verizon breach investigation report from last year, 2019. As far as like outsiders versus insiders and the attacks that we're seeing there, you can see that 69% of breaches came from the outside and 34% were actually perpetrated by insiders. So kind of give some perspective there as to how systems are being accessed. As far as how the breaches are occurring, 32% of the breaches in 2018 involved phishing. So phishing attacks are still, kind of key as one of the ways that outsiders can get into your systems. Basically 3% of all recipients in a phishing campaign will eventually click. All it takes is that one person. So you want to make sure that, those phishing campaigns aren't successful in your organization. But probably the most important slide here, as far as the overall threat goes, has to do with the exploitation of vulnerabilities. This actually came from the Forrester Wave report, talking about the way that systems are exploited. And you can see that 41% of all breaches that were successful exploited a software vulnerability. So you can see that it's very important that these vulnerabilities be addressed within your organization. What's kind of interesting is we really like this slide. The CEO of Acros Security says, as much as things have changed, they really haven't since even 1999. In the 16 years that we've been in this business, you can follow the exact same process that you did back then. First of all, find a public exploit for a vulnerability that's less than 4 months old. Tailor the exploit to work with your remote administration tool, whatever you happen to be using for attacking a given system or a given set of systems. Mutate the exploit until it can't be detected by a lot of the tools that are out there. They use VirusTotal here as an example, but there are a lot of tools out there that can detect things. You want to make sure you can get around those. Finally, phish users in the enterprise until you're in. So, some things haven't really changed. Those exploits being attacked against systems through phishing attacks are still very common. Let's move on to a couple of recent cyber threats just to kind of put things in perspective. And I chose one here that I think is key to talk a little bit about exploitation of vulnerabilities. So this is called the Samsam Attack. And if you've seen this, you can look up a lot of information about this particular attack out there on the internet. There's a lot of information published as to how this was actually occurred. This started back in 2015 and actually lasted up until the arrest of 2 people in 2018. This was kind of interesting in that they primarily targeted government and the healthcare industry. They were generally going after systems, groups of systems that were smaller in nature, that the systems are groups of organizations that they knew had smaller IT staffs and really didn't have the resources that they needed to keep their systems up to date. So once again, not being able to patch those vulnerabilities. And they were very slow and methodical about the approach that they took. In this case, their end game was not really trying to get data out of these systems, but really to ransom systems simultaneously. And so the method that they used for their attacks, once again, these took several months against a given organization. This was not just a shoot and see what happens. This was definitely very slow and methodical. They would gain a foothold in systems through phishing or through maybe an external exploit that they could use. What they would then do is they would spread through the network using additional exploits, compromised credentials, any locally available tools. And what they would do is they would put the ransomware on the systems and have it kind of in a waiting mode until a key thing would occur. So for example, late on a Friday afternoon, then they would set off the ransomware. It would then very quickly encrypt all the files across all these systems that they had exploited. And then they would wait and extort a reasonable ransom from these organizations. And a lot of times, the reason they chose these organizations is because they were willing to pay. They really didn't have the resources to go out and recover all their systems. They really wanted to unlock this ransomware and kind of move on with their life. And you can see that it was pretty successful. On average, they were pulling in about $330,000 US per month from all this ransomware. The average ransom paid was relatively small. They knew that these organizations were smaller and wouldn't be able to pay a lot. And in the end, they ended up collecting over $6 million from all of this. So you can see that they were very successful over a period of about 3 years there. You can read about the techniques that they used. Once again, they were it was very important that they exploited these vulnerabilities in the systems, the ones that were available. Just kind of touch on a few more very quickly. Emotet is another one that's been around for quite a while. This originally started as a banking malware. It's evolved very quickly into a much more capable set of tools that can infect, spread, and execute spam campaigns across an organization. Another one that affects government, public, and private companies. And unlike the other one that was the Samsam Attack, which was responsible for ransomware or used ransomware, this organization are the ones that use this attack or actually stealing sensitive data from these organizations. Another one is TrickBot. You can read through the slide here and see kind of what this involves. This has the ability to harvest email and credentials and individual credentials to log into systems. Once again, they were going after Bitcoin wallets in this case. So you can see there are a number of attacks out there. I just want to show that there are attacks occurring. There is a given threat out there, and it's very important that you protect your systems against these. One of the latest things that we heard was Bluekeep. This occurred in last year, where these vulnerabilities showed up in Remote Desktop Protocol, or RDP. Interestingly enough, there were another series of vulnerabilities about 2 years earlier that the Samsam attackers used as well. These are warmable, meaning that they can spread from system to system. Exploits can spread from system to systems prior to logging into a system. So that's the reason or the definition they give for warmable. It is concerning enough that Microsoft did release updates for even really old operating systems like XP in 2003. The good news about this one is that these updates were released very quickly, and there was enough information out there on notifications about this particular vulnerability from a lot of different sources that most organizations very quickly applied these updates and closed down these vulnerabilities. We haven't seen any large attacks from these. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the threat. We've talked about some examples of given attacks. I think it's important that we talk a little bit about security frameworks and guidance and how you go about protecting your systems. One of the organizations that we like to quote is the Center for Internet Security. They have a very organized approach to the way they do business. They are up to version 7 of their security controls, as shown here on this slide. You can see that they break them out into the basic, foundational, and organizational sections. But most importantly for us, looking over there at the basic side, you can see that the top 6 that they have here are things that are kind of common practices and how you should approach protecting your systems. You can see the first 2 are really about knowing what's in your organization as far as assets go. What hardware do you have? What software do you have? Obviously, you can't secure it unless you know it's out there. Interestingly enough, the third one is continuous vulnerability management, and that's in the 3rd position from an importance perspective as well. What's interesting is that the Center for Internet Security says that if you can implement the top 5 controls, once again, knowing what you have, 3rd place there was your vulnerability management. The 4th and 5th ones that I skipped through there are privilege management and using the built-in security of your existing operating systems. If you can use those and implement those top 5 controls, you can control basically 85% or block 85% of the attacks that are out there, which is a huge percentage for most types of attacks. Why is continuous vulnerability management so important? Well, from the time that a vulnerability is announced, basically there's a race on to get it fixed, right? And make sure that it can be protected against. So On our side, from a defensive standpoint, we're trying to get a patch in place. On the offensive side, they're trying to weaponize and develop an automated way to very easily exploit the vulnerability and get into your systems. So that's very important from a continuous vulnerability management standpoint. Once again, coming back to the top 5 of those 6 controls, you can see here that inventory is very important. Continuous vulnerability management is critical to this, making sure that those vulnerabilities are plugged with the latest updates. Then we have controlled administrative privileges and using the existing configuration capabilities from a security standpoint in your hardware and software. With that, I've kind of walked through the importance of seeing the threat and knowing why it's important that you continue to patch your systems. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ray to talk a little bit about the Vicarious solutions and how they are going about helping you implement that continuous vulnerability management. Ray, over to you.
Thanks, Todd. Thank you for the excellent slides. It's interesting enough. We are also quite easily can continue this flow, sharing some numbers. So let me just share my screen here. And let us discuss again a bit more about the challenges around the continuous vulnerability management companies are facing all over. So as we know, this is an epidemic. You have so many vulnerabilities which are being disclosed every month. The numbers today reach to over 1,000 new vulnerabilities that are publicly available and are disclosed. And as you mentioned, Todd, there is a race whenever a vulnerability is being released. Then there is a race among companies or let's say hackers and defenders to either find a patch or to find an exploit. And it's kind of challenging for the end user and the end company to cope with the sheer amount of vulnerabilities which are out there. Altogether, we have somewhere around 140 vulnerabilities which are publicly available, not mentioning the ones who are still considered to be 0 days, not yet disclosed, not yet found by anyone. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. From our research, we found in regards to software flaws, the United States Department of Defense found that 90% of every cyber attack originated in 2017 was abusing or exploiting flaws inherited inside software. So again, not necessarily vulnerabilities, also some issues in code and by design are a result of many attacks. And also the race, which we are kind of always talking about, it takes about 6 months from the moment of disclosing a vulnerability up until the moment the user is patching it, assuming he knows he got a vulnerability and he got an official patch. On average, it takes 3 months from the moment of disclosing a vulnerability for a vendor until they confirm, approve, and develop a patch. Then the vulnerability scanners or management getting the signature of the vulnerable application, which afterwards begins the cycle of deploying the patch to each and every machine. So again, just to summarize, you have, as an attacker, you have a golden window of 6 months, which is again challenging for companies wherever. So what we are trying to achieve here at Vicarious is to really try to build a solution which touches in the entire chain of vulnerability management through making the right decision and mitigating it. So just a few slides on the technology that so we have a three-engine kind of approach and solution. The first one is called Analyze. And the purpose of this engine is to truly give you continuous visibility to vulnerabilities wherever and whenever. We are capable of first, and I think it's kind of the bread and butter of vulnerability management, giving companies and our clients visibility for vulnerabilities as they emerge, which means that whenever there is a new vulnerability that is disclosed instantly, the client knows and getting notified about that by simply doing continuous vulnerability management. Imagine you have just deployed a new software, then of course you need to validate that and make sure there is no threat for your company. So we instantly are capable of and giving a heads up if what we try to innovate here, which is kind of goes back to the former slide of software flaws. The fact there is no public vulnerability, as we know, doesn't mean a software is safe. You can have a vulnerable application. You have a vulnerable application and you're not knowing about it because there is no public CV. That doesn't say your software is safe. What we are doing at that phase also is we try to unveil inner threats by doing automated reverse engineering for applications. So in fact, their system is capable of providing both known vulnerabilities as well as unknown threats, unknown vulnerabilities. And we do this instantly. So the outcome of the analysis engine is visibility for known as well as unknown vulnerabilities as they emerge. Once we have found the vulnerabilities, then the question being asked, which one of them are actually matter? Which one of them are relevant for my company? Because Todd, you and I may be using the same application, but again, you may be using it differently. We may have the same amount of vulnerabilities, but your vulnerabilities may not get exploited ever because of the usage. Because some vulnerabilities require a network kind of attack. Some of them require you to have high privileges. So we are capable of validating this continuously on each and every client side, which means, in fact, you need to handle far less amount of issues and vulnerabilities than simply trying to solve each and every one, giving the number of these issues, which kind of brings us to our to the last part of taking an action. So effectively, once you have found vulnerabilities and you do it continuously, you want to take action as things emerge. So the first option we're bringing out of the box is the ability to do patching. Given the cooperation we got with the excellent guys from Ivanti, we have integrated Ivanti's engine to do automated patching for our clients, which means that if you have a vulnerability which can get resolved by a patch, you will be able to accomplish that by simply automating the patching cycle. Or another alternative approach, as we know, life is not perfect and we cannot install every patch whenever we want. So sometimes we need to have a bit more advanced countermeasures for vulnerability management. And our proprietary technology is the ability to secure an application in runtime in cases where you cannot patch. Obviously, the recommendation would be to patch when possible, but in scenarios where it's not possible, not achievable, you can secure an application using our technology in instant, in a click of a button. Before we go to the demo, just want to share a few, this slide about the deployment or integration or the ease of that for our clients. So in order to deploy the solution, a one-liner command is enough to connect the machine into the environment. Within 60 seconds, you will gain full visibility of zero days as well as known vulnerabilities. And this will be, from that point on, it will be continuous. Making the right decision will be kicking in after about an hour, and given the fact we need to collect some information beforehand, and taking an action using the patching module or the virtual patching, it's in instant you can do so. So I would like to show just a bit how we can achieve some of the changes Todd had mentioned about vulnerabilities and making the right calls on which ones should be treated. So this is the operational or the overview screen of the system, the main dashboard. As you can see, there is a listing here of the risks the system was able to identify. And as you can see, it's quite in the center. We have 18 action items, so things we found to be at high risk, which is a combination of known alongside these hashtags, which you can compare to IOCs. These are like indicators of risk we found in this specific environment. So even though we got over 200 known vulnerabilities in about 20,000 code locations, which may be compromised or found as a CV in the future, we were able to reduce that to just 18 action items, 18 high-risk applications that you need to take care of. So the tags, just to cover briefly, the way companies today are actually using the system to make the right call. So for example, we know a lot of companies are using the fact if there is an external exploit out there to make a decision whether they should fix a vulnerability or not. But we were also able to provide our customers the visibility for does an application is actually getting used. Imagine you have a lot of vulnerabilities all over, but only a fraction of the applications are actually exploitable because they go to memory. Let's try to put it in another way. If you have a vulnerable applications with countless amount of potential risks and issue, if it's not going to memory, if it's not running, if it's not it's not available for the hacker to exploit, then in fact it's not something you should allocate resources as we speak now, maybe someday in the future when it will become actually exploitable. So in terms of the overview of this system, whenever you go in, you are capable of seeing what is my current security posture. As we said, this is continuous vulnerability security posture management system. So you can see my current status of vulnerabilities. And should we want to take an action for something, then easily we can go to the operational screen, where we can easily go through the different topics and applications the system was finding to be vulnerable. So for example, if we take one example, Firefox, as we found it to be at high risk. So we can see at first glance what is the recommended treatment, what we can do in order to remediate the threat. So when you achieve or get into a continuous vulnerability management, you also want to take action as soon as possible. So the first and the highest impact of treatment we recommended in this case is to deploy a patch. And the process looks like clicking on the patch and selecting the specific version that we wish to deploy the patch for. And we can also select the computers and pick the version we want to deploy. From that point, what's going to happen is that the command is going to be sent to the relevant machines that we have selected, and then they will be promoted to the version we have chosen. Obviously, it will take a few moments to be accomplished. Now a command is being sent to these computers to upgrade their version, which eventually will be resulted as now a secure and vulnerable-free version. There are some scenarios where we do not have a patch. So let's take Git client as an example. As you can see, we have found well-known vulnerabilities, yet there is no patch available, as we can see under the patchment. Companies may try to remember later on to do something about that, to maybe write it on the side note, and hopefully in the next month there will be a new version to be patching the issues. What we offer here is the ability to do patchless protection, which is as simple as selecting and picking the relevant versions and relevant machines we wish to protect. And then once we click on the protection, these assets and the Git client inside these computers will be covered, will be protected in real time against exploits, which is in fact another innovative way we allow our customers to remediate vulnerabilities again at scale. Eventually, the end goal here is to reduce the amount of work for clients around the vulnerability management side, and also give clear visibility of their current security posture. Generally speaking, our goal here is to reduce the amount of vulnerabilities from 18 to 0, and we offer multiple ways to achieve that. In terms of management, so companies are usually using the system to do dynamic grouping. So you have the ability to create dynamic groups based on multiple properties and criteria of the client. For example, we have clients who have taken all of their internet-facing computers, as we can see here. And we can manage the patching cycles and the reporting around that. So we can create now a group, which we will call it a network active devices. And whenever a new machine will emerge with network connectivity, it will be automatically added to this group. So this is in regards to the vulnerability management side. So we can, again, as what we're doing, we're trying to streamline the vulnerability management aspects of the system to clients and to reduce the amount of attention and workload around this entire process. If there are any further questions, we'd be happy to take it. Yeah, so feel free to ask.